Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight for webinar on risk, privacy, and communicating electronically. My name is Evelina Kozok. I'm practice support officer. I have also supporting me Fleur Van, who just came back from her honeymoon, so some practices probably missed her. So she's back. You can see also Angela, Myson, Lynch, and Julie Co-op from Avant. I will come back to introducing Angela more a little bit later, because I would like to start from acknowledging the traditional custodians and sovereign people of the land across which we work. I recognize their continuing connection to land, water, community, and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend this respect to any Aboriginal colleagues who may be joining us today. Introduce our speaker, Angela Myson Lynch, risk advisor from Avant.
I bring you my experience as a risk advisor, talking about some of the things that happen to our members, practices out there that can happen so easily to any of you. So I'll talk about those scenarios and help you prevent them happening in your practice. I do want to introduce my colleague from Avant, Julie Co-op, who's my right-hand woman, and she'll be supporting me tonight by sending all the links that you need following on from my presentation, because I know you'll be hungry for more information. So welcome, Julie, and thank you very much, Evelina, for introducing. So I'm talking to you about some of the privacy breaches specifically that we're seeing at the moment. But I want to talk a little bit broadly about some of the other risks we've seen evolve at Avant, over the past 2 years, particularly around the digital health environment. On the back of COVID, we embraced a lot of different ways to communicate with our patients and consult with our patients. So I'm going to talk to you about a few of those issues that we've seen arise. I guess one of the most important things that we've seen at Avant is that complaints are on the increase. And I'm talking about complaints from patients. Patients just find it really, really easy to complain about you now. And it's like they want to, I don't know whether it's because they're not happy with the healthcare system or the healthcare system has lost credibility during COVID. We don't know what it is, but we suspect it might be that it's very easy for them to complain now on their mobile phones. We've got evidence of patients complaining while they're sitting in your waiting room. So there's lots of different places they complain. They can go directly to the medical board, to APRA, if they want to complain about a practitioner. They can go directly to the privacy website. And I've just taken some screenshots of websites and popped them on this slide. And you can see the Office of the Australian Information Commission's up there on the top left. It's pretty easy to make a complaint. We've also seen patients complain to Safe Work about your practice because they don't feel safe in your practice. By far, though, the most common place that they complain is to the HCCC, and that's the big green box up on the top right-hand corner there. So again, super easy for them to log on to this website and make a complaint. Now, look, we advocate that complaints are great, but we want your patients to complain to you so that you can use it as a quality improvement activity to improve things in your practice or to think about how you're doing things in your practice. I guess the unfortunate thing is that a lot of patients don't feel that they can complain to you, or they feel like if they complain to you, you won't take it seriously. So they feel like they have to go to these regulatory bodies. So look, I really implore you to offer them the opportunity to complain directly to you and really to take it seriously. It doesn't matter what the complaint is, take it seriously, log it as a quality improvement activity and a risk identification. And then you can put into place some sort of an improvement in relation to that complaint. So they're the places that patients complain. And let me tell you, it's really easy. They're almost led down a path of, with the questions that they're asked. There's a few different legislations and guides that are out there. The ones that we seem to see most regularly used when a regulatory body is assessing a practice. So what happens, a regulatory body will receive a complaint, regardless of where the complaint's gone. Say if it's gone to the Privacy Commissioner, they might involve the HCCC or the medical board. If it goes directly to the medical board, they might include the HCCC or Fair Work or Safe Work or whoever. They all these regulatory bodies talk. But certainly what we see is when you get a complaint, and hopefully you'll ring us or your indemnity insurer immediately, but when you get a complaint and you have to respond, we see that you're judged against, in general practice, the standards for general practice. So that's the standards that you meet for accreditation. You're judged against the privacy principles, and there's a few that are relevant, and we're going to be talking about those a little bit further on. You will be judged against the rules around a safe workplace. So that's a state organisation, so safe work. But predominantly, because you're a medical practice working vicariously for medical practitioners, you will be judged against the Code of Conduct. So I tell everybody to have a look at the Code of Conduct. It's not a hard read, but it's a really good, I think it's about 16 pages. It gives you a good idea of what the expectations are for you as either a doctor or as somebody working vicariously for a doctor, or a nurse if you're registered with APRA, what you need to be doing. So when you're working vicariously for a medical practitioner, you adopt that duty of care to the patient that the medical practitioner has. So that's talked about in the Code of Conduct. Working as a doctor registered in Australia, as a registered nurse registered in Australia, or somebody working vicariously for those people, you have a level of professionalism that you have to abide by. So these professional behaviours. So, if you're working vicariously for a doctor, you can't get on your personal Facebook page and post photos of you drinking wine at the practice meeting, where the practice logo is in the background. Those sorts of things are considered unprofessional. And there was a case a couple of years ago now where the receptionists and practice manager all got together for a practice meeting, and at the end of the practice meeting they all did they held up their wine glasses in front of the big practice sign in the background saying, this is what a meeting looks like at blah general practice, and posted it on their social media profiles. And it was interesting because in that particular case, the doctor who owned the practice took a real stand on this and dismissed the staff, and it was reasonable. So professional behaviours are really important, regardless of whether it's on your private Facebook page or on the practice website or Facebook page. And I guess we can't control what a person does on their private Facebook page, but what we can control is them linking it to the practice. So everybody in the practice needs to have education on how not to link their personal profiles to the practice, because if they do link it, then they've got to be professional 24/7. Working with patients, look, you working vicariously for a doctor. The doctor has a responsibility to effectively communicate, and so you as a support staff member has that responsibility as well. Interestingly, it talks in the code about treating family and friends, and that includes treating people at the practice. So you shouldn't be seeking seeking treatment at your practice if you're employed at the practice, and if you're a doctor working in a practice, you shouldn't be treating staff there. It's not acceptable unless it's an emergency, and this does sit very clearly in the code of conduct. Obviously, privacy we're going to talk a lot more about today, but the code talks really clearly about privacy and what your responsibilities are to the patient. Respectful culture is talked about in the code, and you know, how you work together as a team in a respectful environment. It also talks about having a safe workplace and everybody's responsibility to work safely and look for risks that might threaten the safety in the workplace and changing it. It also talks about coordinating and delegating care, and this might be the medical record. So I often hear practices say they won't allow staff to have access to write anything in the medical record, but you need to make sure that anybody working vicariously for a doctor can still make notes relevant to the patient, and this is particularly important if you're using email, which we'll talk about shortly. So that's just a bit of an overview of the code of conduct and some of the problems that we've seen arise recently. Some of those support staff behaviours reflect directly to the code of conduct, and they're just those issues that we just talked about. One thing I will mention is that the code of conduct talks about measuring adverse events. So when something goes wrong, they want you to look at what's gone wrong and work out why it went wrong and make sure that you change something in your practice so it doesn't go wrong again. And that's a really valuable piece of evidence for us when we respond to these regulatory bodies on your behalf. So say if you do have a privacy breach complaint raised, we want to see that in the past you've had privacy breaches and you've done something about it, you've changed something, or you've had a suspected privacy breach, or you've had almost a near miss privacy breach, but you've done something about it. So those sorts of things are really, really important for us as evidence. So let's get into what if a complaint is raised to a regulatory body and they send you a letter, hopefully, as I said earlier, you would contact your medical defence organisation. Once you've contacted your defence organisation, they're going to want evidence that you haven't been really slack. Basically, they want to be able to respond to the regulatory body and say, yeah, rightio, this happened, but you know, it was an accident, or you know what, this didn't happen, this is vexatious, and here's why it didn't happen in our practice. So some of the things that really work well as your evidence is your policies and procedures. So if you've got written policies and procedures about email communication, for example, or you know, even how you back up your data, that sort of evidence is really good for us. So the policy or the procedure, but not just that you've got a written policy. We want to see that the staff have read the ones and signed off on the ones that are relevant to them. And we'll talk more about that shortly. We want to see that there's discussion documentation when something's gone wrong. So, you know, certainly as an accreditation surveyor before I joined Avant, one of the things that frustrated me so much when I was doing a survey visit, I'd ask practices, you know, tell me what happens when something goes wrong, and they'd look me straight in the eye and say, nothing ever goes wrong in this practice, thinking that that was the right answer to the question. And you know what? It wasn't the right answer to a surveyor, and it's not the right answer to a regulatory body. We know, everybody knows that mistakes happen. We're all human. We want to see that you're actually seeking out when problems happen, so that you know, if something goes wrong in the waiting room, or if something goes wrong in the consult room, or, you know, if something goes wrong somewhere, if a patient's complained, we want to see that it's been documented, that it's been discussed, that you've thought about whether or not you could do things better. We want to see training. Training is so important, and Julie's going to send in the email tomorrow that you'll receive. She's going to talk to you about some of the training modules that Avant have. They're mostly aimed at doctors, but they're online, they're free, and there are some that would be relevant to staff as well. Have a look at what's there if you're a member. As I said, they're online and they do add CPD points. We love to see checklists. So we love to see that before you do something that's of high risk, there's a checklist that you're going through. And if we can see that written somewhere, that's fantastic. It shows us that you as a practice is serious about making sure you do things the right way. We want to see a QI register or a review of what's going wrong. We want to see risk assessments done. Look, since COVID, you had to do risk assessments for your COVID safety, but you also have to do risk assessments now for discrimination on the grounds of sex. So that's under safe work. So risk assessments, if you're not doing them in your practice, and if you're a doctor listening to me down now saying, oh, that's not up to me, or if you're a receptionist saying, oh, that's not me, it's a practice manager, well, you're both wrong. A risk assessment should involve everybody in the practice. You should be all asked for your input. What do you think the risks are here if we start using email more openly? What do you think the risks are, doctor? What do you think the risks are, nurse? What do you think the risks are, receptionist? These are all important questions because you'll all have different reasons or different ways that you think this could be risky. And then once you've identified the risk, then you can contain it. We've got a great fact sheet on doing a risk assessment, and Julie will send that one around to you. Obviously, keeping information in the patient record is really important. And this is really important if you're going to start using emails. Don't rely on your email to keep information about what you've sent to a patient. Make sure that that's documented in the patient record. It's a much safer place, and it's better for us when we're trying to defend you or respond for you to be able to have everything in one place and be able to show the regulatory body that you keep everything in one place and you protect that information. And again, we'll talk more about that shortly. Look, one thing that we've seen a real increase in over the last probably 18 months is cyber attack. It's unbelievable. And do you know what? We are astounded at how many practices think they're doing a backup, think they're practicing safely, and they're not. I can't stress enough the importance of making sure that your IT company, and one would hope you've got an external IT company. The minute I hear somebody say, oh, the doctor's really good with computers, he does this or she does this, or, our practice manager really's got a head around this, I cringe, because it's too sophisticated now for you to try and manage yourself. It's so important that this information is protected and safe, because we've got evidence of practices that have been flooded recently, and their backup hasn't worked for 2 years, 4 years. It's really quite frightening. We've got cases where a cyber attack has occurred and it's actually climbed up into the backed up data. So make sure you get something in writing from your IT provider assuring you that your backup is safe, that it's in more than one place, that, at most you're only going to lose, say, 24 hours worth of data. You don't want to lose 4 years of data, because, it's going to come back to bite you in so many ways. So really make sure you get your security in place, and we have got some fact sheets that we can send around about this. One of the things I do see often is practices still backing up to an external drive, which is fine. And, a receptionist being tasked with the job of swapping that backup disk over, that backup drive over every day or whatever, which is fine again, but just make sure that external drive is actually able to be restored from, and make sure that person that's swapping those drives over is taking that really seriously, because it's not worth it once you've lost this information. We've had a practice just recently that had 2 backup drives. They hadn't disconnected one in the morning. They got a virus, and well, they had a cyber attack, and it attacked up into the backup drive as well. The one that they had taken off site the day before was actually not back. It wasn't a good backup, so they lost all their data. So it's very, very important that somebody is checking this and making sure that it actually works. And getting an email saying your backup was successful is not enough. You want to know that the IT, the people that are managing your backup, are actually restoring from that backup. If you're backing up to the cloud, there's a whole page in the information security guidelines written by the RACGP, that's the picture on the screen, that talks about what sentences you want confirmed by your by the IT company that's managing your cloud backup. I wanted to give you a couple of case studies now that I've seen, particularly around privacy in this digital landscape that we're working in at the moment. So I've dealt with a practice that the doctor wrote down an email address for something. So a patient rang and wanted to speak to the doctor. The doctor ended up speaking to the patient, and the patient wanted something emailed to them, and the doctor agreed to do that. This was during COVID. So the doctor asked the patient what their email address was and wrote it down. The receptionist couldn't read the doctor's writing when he brought it out to the receptionist and said, could you email this to the patient? And ended up emailing this information to the patient that was the wrong email address. So the patient had to be notified, because nobody knew where this email went. And there was no response, but there was no rejection either. So the patient had to be notified. It was quite confidential information. So the Privacy Commission had to be notified about this, because the patient was really upset that the incorrect email had been used. We've also had emails sent to work addresses, and the patient wasn't expecting it. So this was a claim that came through because the patient received information about some surgery that he was about to have. His work intercepted emails on a regular basis as part of their QI. And so they saw that this patient was having a procedure, and it was quite a major procedure in the next few months. So the patient made a complaint. He did not realise that this email would be sent to his work. He did confirm that he wanted an email used, but he did not expect it to be his work email address. So if you're going to be using email, the patient needs to understand exactly what is going to be sent to that particular email address that they've supplied. We also had an email that was sent to a home email address, and it was opened by the wife of the patient. I'm sure I've probably told this story to you before. This was a really interesting one, because this GP did vasectomies in his practice, and he did a vasectomy on a patient. The patient came back for their post-vasectomy sperm count. The GP then sent an email to the patient saying your sperm count has come back negative, so you can resume unprotected sex. And the wife opened this email, and she'd had a hysterectomy 5 years earlier. So she asked the question, why was my husband having a vasectomy? So the husband made a claim that it was a breach of privacy. So again, just not thinking, the doctor probably thinking, yeah, I've done the right thing here. I'm making it easy for my patient, but not realizing that the patient wasn't expecting this to happen. There's so many of these stories that I can tell you. I think technology really lets us down sometimes. I think we relax a little bit and we don't do the proper ticks and checks to make sure that that we're still considering the patient's privacy and what we owe to the patient in our duty of care. We often use a machine that we can type an email address into and then send information, almost like a fax, but you're emailing it. And we've had a claim recently where the fax machine, which was actually sending to an email, picked up an extra page, and a patient, instead of just receiving their information, they received information about another patient, and it was quite critical information. And they rang the practice and said, I've received this information about this patient. This is pretty bad. And the patient actually made a complaint to the Privacy Commissioner, but they also contacted the patient whose information that they'd received, and she also made a complaint to the Privacy Commission. So this was a pretty serious complaint as well. So when these sorts of things happen, when we have to respond on your behalf, the types of things that we want to see is that you've got a really good, strong policy in place that has also been educated to your people. So, and it's not just email, it might be fax or mail as well. You just need to be super careful about protecting the patient's privacy the whole way along the journey of this communication process. So we want to see a policy written about who can actually send an email. So who can do that? Is it only the doctor from the doctor's room? Is it a receptionist? Is it only a certain, couple of receptionists? Is it only a nurse? Doesn't matter. We don't care. So long as you've got a system for identifying who the best person to send an email is. What can actually be sent? So will you send anything that the patient wants, or are there certain things that you won't send by email? Again, we don't mind. We just want you to have sat down and thought about this as a practice and decided, well, what do we think is reasonable to be sent, and how can we protect this so that the patient's privacy is taken care of. Who can it be sent to? So will you only send it to the patient, and then the patient sends it on to a referrer? Let's say the patient needs a referral to a cardiologist, and they say, okay, can you email that for me? So how do you email it directly to the cardiologist? Is that okay? Because that's different than emailing it to the patient. Remember, when we're talking about confidential information, we think about it being a shared ownership. So the patient part owns the information, the practitioner part owns the information, and the practice part owns the information. So all those people have to be involved in sending it on to another person. So who confirms the address that you're using for that email? So when is that confirmed, and how do you know it's correct? So if you've got an email address on the patient's file, how do you know that it's the one that the patient wants this information sent to? Because things can change for the patient. So they might be quite happy for some things to be sent to a home email address, but then if something is a little bit more sensitive, they might say, no, I don't want this one sent by email. I'd rather come and collect it. Or you can send it to a different email address, a private email address. So it's up to the patient to decide on where they want their information sent. If you are keeping email addresses for specialists, we'll make sure that the patient is okay with you giving their information to a third party, but also that you're checking that specialist email address is correct. Look, consent from the patient is absolutely imperative on every encounter. You can't just have a blanket consent for email usage. It's just not going to work yet. It's still too new in healthcare to have them expect that you will send everything by email for them. And the information will vary on its delicacy or secrecy to the patient. So how do you get their confirmation that they've consented? What does that look like? Is it a verbal consent, which it might be? If you're doing a telehealth, it might be a verbal consent. Is it a written consent? Is it something that you get the patient to email you and then keep that on file? It doesn't really matter how you get that consent, but we want to be certain that you've talked to the patient about this and the patient has said, yeah, send it off to the third party, or yes, send it to me to this email address. Identifying the patient, just like when a patient comes to the practice for care, you have your 3 points of identification. You know, you've known about this for many, many years now. You're supposed to be checking this every single time you have an encounter with the patient. Same with email. If you're emailing information, make sure that every page is able to identify the patient correctly, and check that before you press send on the email. That goes for fax and snail mail as well. Document the process. So where are you writing what you've sent to the patient when it was sent, and where are you putting that? Is, if you don't have access to the medical record, is it in a note against the patient's file? If you're a doctor and you've just done a telehealth consult, are you documenting it in the patient medical record? There's lots of shortcuts that you can set up in the different software programs that you use in general practice that can just prompt you to document certain things. So you might just say something like, okay, at the end of your teleconference, okay, I'm going to send this referral off to the specialist. Is that okay with you? Is it okay if I send it off directly to the specialist, or would you like me to email it to you, and document that? Look, we highly recommend, if you can't encrypt, which a lot of software companies allow you to encrypt, you still have to get consent from the patient. But if you can't encrypt the information, it's a good idea to password protect it as an attachment. So that just gives you another level of security. Even now, I mean, you don't have to, but if we're responding for you, we want to show that you've tried to a reasonable level to protect the patient's privacy. It's not that hard to PDF a document and pop a password on it, and then ring the specialist and tell them what the password is, or say to the patient, okay, I'm going to email this to you and the password's your date of birth, just so that it can't be opened by anybody along the way. We call all these pieces of evidence defense building blocks. This is what we use when we're responding for you or defending you. It's your written systems, it's your training. These are the sorts of things that we want to show as a evidence that you're serious about the patient's privacy and you've done what's reasonably necessary. Look, I really, really love this acronym. I think if we could get all our support staff and even doctors, if they're sending off an email, to stop before they press send. Before they press send, just stop and work through the acronym CAN do. So can you send this email? Can I do it? CAN is consent. So have you got the consent to, and is it to the patient or is it to a third party? What's the address? So A is address. What's the address that you've got? How do you know it's correct? How can you be sure that you've checked that you've typed it in correctly? Make sure that you do that name, date of birth and address on every page that you're emailing or whatever you're doing, faxing, whatever. Make sure that you're putting patient identification on every single page. Document it. Where are you documenting that you've checked everything, you've double checked everything, and you've got the patient's consent, and that's documented somewhere as well. What have you done about the password? What sort of a password have you put on, and how have you let the patient know what the password is? So if you can work through this acronym every time before you press send on an email, that's going to show us that you're serious about privacy. And even though you're using email, which is not secure, you are doing what is reasonably necessary to protect the patient's privacy. I do want to talk about when you have to notify the Privacy Commission. It was quite interesting. Just prior to COVID, I did a presentation with somebody from the Privacy Commission, and I said to her just before we spoke, I said, how many of the notifications you get are actually really needing to be notified? And she said probably about 30%. So you don't always have to notify the Privacy Commission if there's been a breach of privacy. What you do have to do is decide, you need to work through and decide what the damage to the patient is going to be. And that helps you decide whether or not you need to let the Privacy Commission know. So this flow sheet, which Julie is going to send around to you, I think it is gold. And if you just work through it with me. So let's do the old story. This was a result for a HIV that was accidentally sent to a service station instead of to the hospital as had been requested, just because the receptionist who sent it got the information wrong and sent it to the wrong place. So the service station owner rang the practice and told them that they'd received this result with the patient's name, date of birth, and HIV reading. What did they want the receptionist? What did they want them to do with it? Should they destroy it, or what should they do? The receptionist realized straight away that she'd made a mistake, and this was actually a fax, but it could have been an email as well. She'd got one digit wrong in the fax number, and it had ended up at the service station instead of the hospital. So thankfully, in this particular case, the receptionist went straight to the practice manager. The practice manager went to the doctor, and the doctor went and visited the patient in hospital that night on his way home from hospital, on his way home from consulting, and said, look, we've had a muck up at our practice, this is what's happened, and told the patient. And the patient went, you know what, it doesn't matter, it's no big deal. So that does not have to be reported, but it does have to be looked at, and you do have to decide what you're going to do about that to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's an internal activity that you would do. But you can see here that there was no real harm done to the patient. However, if that patient had said to the doctor, oh my God, my uncle owns that service station, they don't know I've got HIV, now it is reportable. So it's very important that you work through the flow sheet and work out, if this is going to cause significant harm to the patient, can remedial action be taken? And if it can, you might not need to report it. But if it can't be taken, then you do need to report it. And I'll give you another perfect example. This was, you may not realize, but there's a certain setting in Skype that if you're doing a Skype teleconference with your patient, the patient may have access to all the other patients' names that you've done a Skype consult with. There's a setting in Skype, so you need to make sure that they can't see that and you've got that setting turned off. This could be notifiable if you all of a sudden realize that this has happened and all your patients' names have been revealed to each other. So this might be something that you do have to go straight to the Privacy Commission about, because you can't control whether significant harm has occurred. So again, it's really important that you contact your MDO if you believe you've had a serious data breach, because we'll help you work through this flow sheet and make the decision on whether or not you need to notify the Privacy Commission or not. As I said before, we're all human. Mistakes happen. Receptionists get something wrong. Doctors' writing is often bad. Instruction is often not great. We're all working very hard under a lot of stress. We're going to make mistakes. The Privacy Commission, the regulatory body, the medical board, all the regulatory bodies know that mistakes are going to happen. They don't expect them not to happen, but what they do expect is that you've tried for them not to happen. So if you do make a mistake, it's important that you pick up the pieces, you work on a solution so it doesn't happen again, but make sure that you've got all these things in place so that we can show the regulatory body that you have been serious about this and it was just a mistake. You're not plain slack. So it's these things we've already talked about: a policy, a procedure, the medical record, so the documentation, the training, and the discussions, so that we can show you've talked about problems and you've tried to prevent them from happening. I want to talk about recalls and reminders now, because again, this is a big, there's been a big shift with the digital age. So you may be aware of the Idomeneo versus Gross case, which, look, if you haven't looked at this, you absolutely should. It was a very interesting case where the receptionist did not get the up-to-date details of a patient, and so the patient couldn't be contacted and told about their pathology results. There was a pretty severe adverse event occurred, and the patient sued the doctor. The doctor then sued the employer of the receptionist because the receptionist had not done their job properly, in that they hadn't collected up-to-date details. It ended up, the court saw it as a 50% share in the responsibility for this. So 50% of the cost went to the GP and 50% went to the employer of the receptionist. And you can imagine the receptionist did not have a job after this. So it's very important that information is updated so that you can recall or remind your patients about things that are clinically significant. And if that is an email address, if you are using an email address, then make sure that you've got that up to date. If you are using mobile phones to text patients about their appointments, you know, your appointment reminders, then make sure you've got up-to-date information and make sure that the patient is expecting it. Because I'll tell you about another case where a 16-year-old girl received a reminder for her appointment with the doctor, but the phone that the reminder went to was her mother's phone. So the mum got this reminder about her 16-year-old daughter's appointment, and she was thinking, I don't know anything about that, what's going on? So she rang the practice and asked if, you know, her daughter had an appointment today at 2 o'clock or whatever it was, and the receptionist said, oh yes it is, it's at 2:15 or whatever. And the 16-year-old girl made a claim that it was a breach of privacy, because she had not realized that an appointment reminder would be going out, and she did not realize that the phone number registered for her was her mum's number. Now you're probably thinking, oh gosh, we can't possibly keep on top of all of that. I guess the important message here is be alert about this. So again, if this happened in your practice and we had to respond for you, we'd want to see that normally this wouldn't happen because normally you check this. So a diligent practice staff member might look at a 16-year-old and say, okay, now we'll remind you about your appointment before, the day before. Is it okay if we text you the mobile phone that we've got listed here for you? Can you just tell me what that is? Those sorts of comments would have stopped this from happening. I've got another funny case study to lighten the mood at what time is it? Quite late at night. This happened in rural New South Wales. I found this quite amusing. This was a young woman came to a practice for her appointment, and when she arrived, the receptionist said to her, "Oh, hi, are you Susan Jones?" And she said yes. And she goes, "Oh, your address, I've got it down here as 25 Smith Street. Are you still there?" And the patient went yes. And she went, "And I've just got your phone number here. The phone number I've got for you is blah 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 blah." And the patient went, yes, that's right." And so she said, "Oh, great, take a seat." There was a young gentleman waiting in the waiting room, and he took down the phone number and rang the patient that night and asked her out on a date. Now, funny, yes, but not funny, because the patient was very upset and made a claim. She said to the patient, "How did you get my phone number?" And he said, "I got it from the practice." And it turned out this is how he got it. But the complaint was made, and this ended up with the Privacy Commission, and the practice was asked, "Why are you telling the patient their details instead of letting them tell you? Why are you not offering patients another way of identifying themselves so that your data is up to date?" So if a patient doesn't want to give you the information, can they write it down? Can you ask them for another way of getting that information that you have to get for every consult? So what alternatives does the practice offer so that the patient's privacy is protected? Again, it's just making sure that you are thinking about the patient's privacy as well as thinking about the job that you've got to do. So when you're checking data, some of the things that you need to be thinking about is don't tell the patient what their details are. Ask them, because if they're giving the information to you, then you're not breaching privacy. Make sure that you can offer other options for the patient. A lot of practices now are offering pods as the patient walks in the door, or at the reception desk. These are a great way of the patient entering the details without sort of having to say it out loud. You might want to give them a bit of paper to fill it out if they don't want to speak out loud. Think about whether or not you want to collect telephone number. If you are communicating with the patient through SMS, then do you want to collect their telephone number every time they come in? If this is the main way that you communicate, well then check it to make sure that it's correct, and just be diligent with everything that you do. If you are SMSing, so patient reminders or whatever, if you're using a third-party portal, it actually works quite well. So if you're using something like Hot Docs, and I'm sure there's others out there where the patient has to identify themselves at the other end, that is a good protector. But just make sure that you get consent. So instead of just on your new patient forms, instead of just asking the patient to give you their mobile, just write in little print somewhere, "We use this to remind you about your appointments." Have a bit of a focus every couple of months on updating phone numbers and saying, "Do you know that we use this to remind you? Is that okay?" Just to make sure that the patient understands what you're doing with their mobile number. Security at the receiving end, as if you're using a third person, a third party like Hot Docs. I think some of some of the software programs that are out there will ask the patient to get them to identify themselves before they can open any information. But ask the question. Make sure you know what you're using SMS for, what's being sent, and make sure that receptionists stay alert. I want to give you another case study with involving telehealth. So again, this is our digital environment. So this was a patient that got a phone call from a doctor. It was all booked. It was a telehealth consult following the patient having a cardiologist appointment, and the cardiologist had written a letter back to the GP. And the GP rang the patient. The patient took the call while he was in his car, and his teenage sons were in the car. And as the consultation sort of developed, the GP talked to the patient about his Viagra script, and this was in front of his teenage boys. So telehealth, it brings about a whole lot of new risks that we need to be thinking about. How do you make sure at the beginning of a telehealth consultation that the patient is actually able to have their consultation? Who asks that question? Is it the support staff working vicariously for the doctor, or is it the doctor themselves? How do you make sure that that patient can have a confidential consultation with the doctor at the time? So things that you need to be aware of regarding telehealth is the planning process. So who makes sure that the patient is going to be private? Who decides on the appropriateness? Because every bit of documentation everywhere talks about the appropriateness of a telehealth consultation, and the regulatory bodies are going to be looking really carefully at this, especially if you're prescribing an antibiotic. Why are you prescribing an antibiotic if you haven't actually examined the patient? So who decides on the appropriateness? Is that the receptionist? Do they say, okay, look, we can only see you for telehealth under these circumstances? Or is it the receptionist says to the patient, look, I'll book you for a telehealth consult, but please know that it may not proceed if it's not appropriate. Doctor will make that decision, and then the doctor makes that decision at the time. And if you can't do the consult, you can't bill. So that appropriateness is really important. So you might want to get together as a practice and decide what will be an appropriate telehealth consultation. Who talks about the payment? And even if it's being bulk billed, you need to say to the patient, are you okay that I bill Medicare for this? And document that. That's a rule. And if you're not doing that and Medicare ping you, you will be in trouble. So who says to the patient, okay, the cost will be $80, or okay, we will bulk bill you for this. Are you okay with that? And where is that written? And it might not be in the medical records. It might be in your process, in your policy that you've written on booking a telehealth consult. It doesn't matter where it is, so long as when we defend you or respond for you, we can show that you have talked to the patient about payment. How do you make sure that you've got the right patient? What's your process for identifying the patient? How do you manage follow-up in a telehealth? And I'm talking about, their follow-up immediately following the consultation, but I'm also talking about things like clinically significant referrals. So if you're writing a clinically significant referral, and this is the patient that you really want them to go and have this test, and you want them to go and have it within this week, who's checking that they actually go and have it? Because you can't hand that responsibility over to the patient. If the patient doesn't go and they make a claim on delayed diagnosis because they didn't attend their referral that you wrote for them, and you weren't tracking it, well, then you are responsible. You have a duty of care to track things that are clinically significant. So that includes clinically significant referrals. And we have got a fact sheet on that, which Julie will be sending around. How do you go about transferring information after the consult? So what happens with the referral, and how do you warn the patient about what's going to happen, what happens with prescriptions. This all has to be documented so that we can show that you're being responsible. Just talking about releasing records. So we've already talked about releasing records to a third party. Remember what I said about that shared ownership of a record. So if you're going to be releasing a record, make sure that the patient knows you're releasing it. We see so many claims raised because in a workers' compensation claim, for example, the whole patient record has been released instead of just the relevant parts. I've seen a claim where a referral letter was written to an orthopedic surgeon with more information than was necessary for the referral. It actually talked about the patient's mental health and a termination of pregnancy, which was not necessary for this particular referral. So releasing records to a third party, you need to be thinking about the patient, what the patient expects to go to that third party. And a simple phone call, if, say, for example, it's for a release of records for a workers' compensation claim, a simple phone call to the patient saying, you realise that the whole record has been requested. Is that what you expect? That can save you from having a claim raised. If you are transferring a record or receiving a record that's been transferred to you, be really careful about importing it. We always recommend that you don't import it until you've sat down with the patient and gone through and made sure it's a clean file, made sure it's an accurate file. I worked with a practice recently who had imported a file from another practice, and the doctor at the other practice had entered information incorrectly. It was the wrong patient that he'd entered in the information of, and the patient's carer made a complaint about the record being inaccurate. So be very careful when you're importing files. You don't want a dirty file in your beautiful records, which hopefully they will be beautiful. So I guess my key message with releasing records is that consider the security, consider how safe is the record that you're releasing. Have you actually talked to the patient about it? How are you securing it in its release? Is it by email or is it by a thumb drive? Is it posted? How are you releasing it securely? Because you don't want to risk the patient's privacy being breached. Remember that it's your responsibility to act in the interest of the patient. So the key messages tonight is that when something goes wrong, and things do go wrong, don't think that they won't go wrong. We want to see documentation. We want to see that you've talked about this at meetings. We want to see your risk assessment. We want to see that your team have been trained, that you've got policies and procedures. Your policies and procedures are your rules for running a business. If you don't play a board game without a set of rules, so why do we try and run a practice? So make sure you've got the policies and procedures, especially around those high risk areas like email communication, release of records, following up significant referrals. Communicate amongst yourselves and the patient. Make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Make sure that the receptionists that are working vicariously for a practitioner understand how important their role is and how they are obliged to stick to the code of conduct just as much as the doctors are. Training is so important, and keeping regular training. So, each year have a brush up on your privacy. We had a practice we helped not that long ago where a receptionist had a very good friend who was going through a messy divorce, and there was a custody battle involved, and the receptionist accessed her friend's husband's record and told her friend all about his mental health and the medication he was on, which was used in court in the custody battle. So the patient made a complaint, and the receptionist was dismissed, as you would expect, for accessing the record and then sharing this information with her friend. The receptionist then went to Fair Work, and Fair Work came back to the practice and said, when was the last time she had training? When was the last time she signed the privacy policy? And it turned out the receptionist hadn't signed her confidentiality statement since she started work there, which was 7 years ago. And Fair Work said, that's not good enough. You need to re-employ her and support her in her knowledge about privacy. So the receptionist ended up back behind the desk for this patient to see every time he came to see the doctor. And you can imagine how the rest of the team felt about what the receptionist had done. So training is so important, and evidence of training. That's what we want to see. We want to see that your people have signed off on policies each year if they have a role in that policy. Remember to develop a culture of concern about the rules that are in place for general practice in Australia. Remember that if something goes wrong, you will be measured by your peers. So if you're doing something that the GP down the road would think, you know what, that's pretty slack, then that's probably what the courts are going to say and what the regulatory bodies are going to say. You're pretty slack. So help us defend you. Read the code of conduct and make sure you seek advice from your MDO. And if you're with Avant, the number's there. As soon as something happens, that's what we're here for. You pay a membership for us so that we can step in really early and look after you and make sure that it doesn't go any further than it should. I might just stop sharing my screen now and take questions from anybody that has any. I'm sorry if I've overwhelmed you with information.
We don't have any question typed yet. That's why I want to remind the audience, you just hover your mouse over question and answers and type your question, and we can get it to Angela. However, we do have questions, of course. For example, I have a question. So if I am a doctor and I have a verbal agreement from the patient that I will send the results by the email to this patient, and I will have disclaimer on the bottom of the email I'm sending that the email is not secure. Is it enough, or I still, yep.
So before you send something, you need to say to the patient, are you okay with me emailing you this information? And can you confirm your email address? And do you understand that the email is not secure? And you have to have them say, yes, I understand that. I still want it sent, and here's my email address. Ideally, it would be great if the patient could email you that, but that's not going to happen. For example, in a telehealth consultation, then they're not going. You don't want to have to make them send you an email. Ideally, it would be great to have them send you an email saying, I request my pathology results, please send them to this email address. My name is blah, my address is blah, my date of birth is blah. I understand email is not secure. I still want you to send it. Thank you. And then that's great. You're covered. But you could do that verbally as well. Not as good, but you could do it.
Sure.
One thing I do want to say as well, if you are using email, make sure you have an auto response on your email as well, because you don't want to build an expectation for the patient that they can use your email for consultations or clinical advice and things like that. So have a disclaimer on there that says, so have an automatic response that says our email is checked on a regular basis and we'll respond to you within 2 days, and then make sure you can do that. Say, this is not for consultations or emergency purposes. Please call the practice on blah if you need that. And please know we take your privacy seriously. Here's a link to our privacy policy. It's pretty easy. Have that as an automatic response on all your emails.
Sure. Now we're starting to have questions. If you have a signed email release from form done previously by the patient, do you need to consent each time?
Yeah, look, I get asked this question a lot. Probably you should get consent every time, to be honest. It depends. If it's something standard that, it's not really a shock to the patient and it's really only the practitioner that can make this judgment, then you might be safe. But I would still recommend that that you get it each time. And again, it depends on what it is. If you've got an email from the patient saying, I want all my pathology results sent to me 2 weeks after, and I understand it's not secure and blah blah blah, all those things I just said before. That's probably going to be okay, but in a year you might want to update it, and how are you going to manage that a year later?
In that case, Angela, couldn't we recommend that the patient use their My Health records so that it's secure?
That would be perfect.
And organise it?
That would be perfect.
And then the other thing, when you were talking about patients having their telehealth consultation and then wanting, the referral sent to them or their results a copy of, Evelina, you might remember this because I've had a bit of time off, but I think with Health Direct, if you're doing a proper Health Direct video, the GP can send directly to the patient, even if the patient's on their phone, the copy of the referral or the copy of their results, and it's all secure.
Yes, right. It would be ideal, but
yeah,
we know that not all GPs are using it, so that's why we need to address all of them. But
offer these services as a PHN.
Sure. At the beginning of the session, you said that a staff of the practice shouldn't be treated by the GP. So we have a question here. What if a practice staff was previously patient for 20 years to this GP? Does it mean the GP can't see this person anymore because now she works in the practice?
Yeah, look, the code of conduct says for many reasons you should not treat family or people that are close to you. There's lots of reasons that they give, such as conflict, particularly in the workplace. Imagine, for example, and I've been dealing with a practice just a couple of weeks ago where a nurse had a mental health issue that the doctor was treating her for, and it got to the stage where he had to make the decision on whether to notify the practice manager because he realized that the practice was at risk because of her mental health condition. You just don't want to put yourself in a position like that. It's too risky. If you feel, and often we talk to rural GPs and they have to see their staff, if you're going to do it, you need to have really strict rules about when you will and won't see the patient, and how payment happens. Like, there's lots of rules around it. It's a whole other webinar which I'd be happy to give, Evelina, but not.
The question would be when this nurse can find the time to see the GP if she's all the time with the other GPs. But it's not a question, of course. It's next question is a very interesting one. Can you record a session with the patient? Do you need consent before the session starts?
Great question. Look, the general advice from Avant is don't record a session and don't have the patient record a session. The reason, so we often have patients asking, can I record this session so I can talk to my, carer or my daughter about it or whatever, especially for elderly people. Look, we prefer not. Look, we don't like to record sessions because it can be used in the digital environment, it can be played with, and that could come back to bite us. And there's lots of other things we can do to involve your carer. We can get them on the line and everything else. I would be very concerned if a GP felt that they needed to record a session. I'd have to ask why. And I think the patient would probably ask why as well. And yes, you absolutely would need their consent to do that. And I think it would possibly make them more concerned. I don't know. I don't know your patients, but we certainly wouldn't recommend it.
What should the doctor say? Because I had this question before as well from the practice. The doctor complained that the patient threatened, I will record what you're saying. So what the doctor should just hang up in that moment? How to refuse?
So the doctor should say, look, really, I don't consent to you recording this. There are a lot of reasons for that. My medical indemnity insurer tells me not to because of the digital landscape that's around these days. So no, I don't consent to that. If you don't, I'd like to know why you want to record the session, and then hear them out. If they say it's so I remember what you say, look, well, I can summarize it for you and send you something. Or if they say, but I want to tell my carer, say, well, how about we get your carer on the line as well, in the consult as well. You know, there's finding out the reason.
I understand. Why. Do you have any examples you can send us on what to write on auto emails?
Oh, look, I can, but is this an auto response? So
yes,
I can send you something. But basically it's the time frame that it will take for it to be answered, that it's not to be used for consultation or emergencies, give the patient the practice phone number for that. And I always like to say, and we take your privacy seriously, please follow this link to our privacy policy. I mean, it's pretty simple. But if you want, we could send you something, Julie. If you remind me, I'll send you, and you can pop it in the email to go out tomorrow.
Another question, more statement maybe. The last secretary was obviously wrong. How protected is the doctor if the practice manager is in charge of training? What if that had been happening to the manager? We know the situation you talked about. Yeah.
This one was really tricky, and we felt quite upset that the reception, like, it just seemed ridiculous that the receptionist thought that was okay. But I guess it just highlights the importance of educating your people. And the reality is that in Australia, the GP, as the primary caregiver of a patient, holds the ultimate responsibility. So as a GP, I would be going to my manager and saying, so how often do our team get trained, you know, or go to the practice principal? You know, you're having clinical meetings, I hope, because you have to under the standards. But I would hope that you are talking at those clinical meetings about, hey, how do we know that our staff aren't breaching privacy? How do we know that our staff are doing the right thing with emails? You know, I ask those questions, because you're paying a percentage of your income to have your practice administered. So make sure that the service delivery is what you're paying.
And I think what would protect doctor in this case is, oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I think what would protect doctor in this case is also clearly documented that the training of the staff is in position description of the manager.
Yeah.
Because then it's a manager responsibility, and the doctor would be less accountable for that. And policies written down who, when will be trained. Next question was, I'm a receptionist. How do I make sure I can't be sued by a patient?
Well, you actually, I don't think anybody's ever sued a receptionist. I'm not quite sure what a patient is going to sue you on, but a patient might make a complaint about you, and if they do, then the practice should be talking about any complaints or anything that's gone wrong. I mean, a patient is going to make a complaint possibly about you, but it goes to the practice, and then the practice would be asked to explain why those behaviours are taking place, are occurring.
So is it under umbrella of practice insurance?
Yeah.
So the receptionist is covered.
Yeah.
Another one is coming back to this record of telehealth consultation.
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah.
Yes,
is it legal? Yeah, it absolutely is illegal for them to record you without your consent. So again, you'd be saying, no, I don't consent, and I'd like to understand why you.
And if you don't know about it, that you are recorded, this record is invalid in any case, isn't it? It's illegal and invalid.
Yeah, it's illegal. The patient, might they use it in a court? I don't know. I haven't seen it ever used in a court. Don't know.
And the last question, patient have asked me to take photos inside the treatment room, like all the photos of vaccines. Is this allowed, or as a nurse I can say no?
So I don't understand. So the patient has asked you to take photos of vaccines.
Maybe it's connected with the COVID for the, I don't know, employer that they were vaccinated. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Can the person who put this question put a little bit more around it? I heard that the patients were asking to take the picture of actual vaccine they were given. I don't know why, to prove that the vaccine was real.
Yeah, I mean, that I can't understand why you wouldn't do that. You're not breaching privacy. You're obviously using the patient's phone. I don't see a problem with that at all.
So then they can take a picture of the vaccine. They shouldn't take a picture of the nurse giving the vaccine, but they can take the picture of their arm being jabbed with the vaccine as well, as long as they don't picture the nurse. Sorry, did I make it complicated?
Why would they even want a photo of them being jabbed by the vaccine? I don't know.
No, but if they
ask why the hell do you want a photo of? I mean, if there is somebody else to take the photo, say if they had a relative with them that wanted to take a photo of them getting their COVID vaccine, and the nurse agreed to have that done, sure, if they want to do that, but I wouldn't link it to the practice if you could possibly do that.
And patient apparently was very angry about it. So another question, could parent allow, is parent allowed to take video when doctors doing vaccine to their children?
Not unless the doctor consents. And why? I don't understand why a patient would want a video of the doctor doing a vaccine on their child. And if I was a doctor, I again would be saying, why do you want a video of this? I would be concerned.
Another question, a doctor in the practice did a skin check for a patient, then patient took photos of the skin marks she looked at and record herself saying, doctor checked this mark and said it is not dangerous. What do we say to this patient?
So
I think it's patient use the pictures which doctor did and record herself that doctor said it's not dangerous. I think it's fine, whatever patient is saying online, it's a patient saying, it's not the doctor said anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, the patient, so the patients posted it online, have they?
It's not written, but I guess, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's no evidence that doctor did say it was fine. I mean, I
Quite a lot of weird requests are there from the patient.
You guys have got weird patients.
No, the patient said to the doctor, this is my record that
You check
these marks.
Well, that's fine. If the doctor looked at it and said it looks fine, and the patient wants to keep a record of that, that's fine. I mean,
still may not give the big picture, because doctor may said, for example, they are fine now, but you need to monitor them, and patient is not saying kind of true, but it's still patient saying, it's not the doctor saying. So I think whatever patients say, it's not a problem of the practice, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if the doctor, as long as the doctor's not recording himself saying that and giving it to the patient, that would not make sense. Is it illegal for a practice nurse or anyone to be present inside the room while the GP is having a consult? For context, the clinic where the GP does the consultation also double in as the practice nurse treatment room. So if you're going to have a third party present in a consultation, they need to give consent. So the doctor needs to say, okay, the nurse is sitting in on this. The nurse is going to be in the room as well. Is that okay with you? And the patient needs to say yes. And that should be documented in the notes as well. Any problem if parent doing video when doctor doing vaccine to their children? Parent just wanted to have memory of the injection. Really? Sure.
So that's what you said. If the doctor consent and he doesn't mind, it's okay. But also he can say no, and he can say our policy says no videos in the treatment room, and then go and write it in your policy.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what's the risk here? The risk is that the patient videos the doctor, then the child gets a reaction, and the patient then uses the video to say the doctor gave it at the wrong angle or something like that. I mean, there is a slight risk to the doctor here if they're going to agree to that. They could feel confident and say, oh, okay, it's fine, I don't mind. Or they could say, look, you know what, in the digital environment that we're in now, we really don't like a video being taken of the consultation in any way, shape or form.
Sure, thank you very much. We came to the end of our questions. It doesn't mean that if you have more questions, you shouldn't call your practice support team or your indemnity company to ask these questions, or look online. We will follow this session with the email. There you will find a lot of links which will be relevant to today's webinar. Angela, thank you very much, and also everybody who attended today, thank you very much for your attendance.